Hey folks, it's Dr. Rowe. I hope you are well. I haven't been online for about a week. Apologize, I've had a lot going on and just trying to juggle many things. And one of the things I've been actually taking the time out this week is to look at the education system overall, and also just from my own perspective. We have two children, a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old. So I thought it was topical for me to bring this subject up and maybe provoke some questions, possibly get a reaction in terms of you reacting to it internally and processing it as well. If there's anyone watching this as a parent, it's always great to get feedback from people and see what their own personal views on this are. I've had a strong view on this for probably a decade and a half now. And bear in mind, I've come through the conventional education system, which is basically getting a degree, going on to get a PhD. I climbed that corporate ladder. I went through the whole monkey climb thing. And over the years, I really started to question, was this really an appropriate preparation for me as I went into my career? As I look at this now in my 50s, and I'm looking at my kids who are obviously going through that ladder, in my mind, 100%, we have a serious freaking problem with our education system. So is the education system and the schooling system broken? I actually think it is. Again, it's just a personal view. You don't have to agree with it or whatever, but I just want to share with you some things to maybe reflect on as I talk about this. Now, I appreciate this is maybe a provocative subject, especially if you've got kids in school right now. So we've just done a great podcast. I do encourage you to go and have a listen to it. I think particularly for the reason that if you have got kids, you might want to think about some of the questions I've raised. Nice to see a bit of acknowledgement there. Thank you. The first question I would ask you to consider is, what is the future looking like for your children? I don't mean at the age of 15 or 16. I'm talking about 5, 10, 15 years from now. What does the landscape look like? And that's the question I ask myself. When I grew up, I was told, study hard. I mean, I come from an Asian background, so it's get a good job, get a good education, and you have to go into engineering or optometry or whatever it is, architecture, be a doctor. So with an Asian background, that's kind of the thing that we were taught to do. And here's the challenge I've got. We are living in an education system that was designed for way back then. I mean, if you go back even prior to, say, the 40s and 50s, going back to the Victorian period, the education system as it crept in very much enabled, especially with the exam system and the formulation of uniforms. Think about the concept of a uniform. We want our children to be unique and individual, and yet we put them all the same in a uniform so they all look and feel the same. That in itself is a contradiction, but that's another conversation for another day. I think we even brought that up on the podcast, actually. Point being that the lie of the land, the landscape for how a child grows up into the world now is not the old system of get a good job for life, get good degree results, you'll be streamlined, and if you get an A, B and a C, especially A and a B, you're classified in this category. If you get a C, you're okay, you're average. Anything below that, you kind of, oh, you got a D, really? And I think our children right now are struggling enough with what's been going on. You put the pressure, I mean, look at the teenage years at the moment. We're getting higher levels of suicide rates. We're getting self-harming rates at alarmingly high levels, stress levels and anxiety levels kicking into our children. And honestly, it's my personal belief that it is the pressure being brought upon children to perform at certain levels too early. And the schooling system has moved from teachers who are passionately wanting to teach their children to inspire them to now having to fit their kids into certain tick boxes and conform with Ofsted or whichever country you're from in order for them to meet certain requirements and then enable them to pass those requirements. And of course, if a child doesn't perform on a specific day in an exam, one moment in their life can have a direct impact on their self-worth, their self-confidence, but also how people review them and reflect on them in years to come. You got what? You got to see. I remember when I went for an interview for having got a PhD. I went for an interview with an engineering company, and I can still remember the gentleman's name. I won't say his name, but he was a Cambridge graduate. He was the director of the company, and here's me having got a PhD, which actually got highly recommended. And he was going through, and this is the classic ego male pushback. Here I come in. Am I a possible threat? And I sat there, and I can still remember this. I was 25, 26 years of age, so that's like 30 years ago. And I still remember him leaning forward and going, "Oh, right, so you only got a C in maths, is that right, at A levels?" So I think I got an A, two Bs and a C or something like that. I can't even remember what I got. But the point was, he said, oh, you only got a C at maths. And I looked at him, and even then I had this kind of real steely, because I'd been studying personal development, remember, by then, about 6 years. I've been in front of audiences for 6 years by then, and I was like really self-evolved in that respect. And I said to him, what has that got to do with anything with this interview here? The fact that I took an exam, 7 or 8 years ago, and I didn't get an A, which is maybe what you got. You're bypassing the PhD and you're focusing on the fact that I got a C. What's the reason you're asking me that question? And he got a bit ruffled by that. And he goes, no, I just wanted to find out, how do you feel your maths is? I said to him, how do you feel your maths is? I've just got through a 4-year PhD and I'm happy with the result of that. Give me a task, I can apply myself. If I can't find the answer, I'll go find somebody that can help me with the answer. So I don't know how many of you acknowledge or understand this. So this is the problem we're faced with, is that underlying judgment that happens to our kids. I personally think we need to develop a new set of rules for how our kids grow and evolve at a young age and what we actually teach them. Do they really need to be studying some of these incredibly old historical periods of time, like, for example, the First World War, the Second World War, or even periods before that? Maybe conceptually for a short time, but there are even more modern day wars and things that have come up that I think are more appropriate, and how they've, how can we learn from those things? How can we evolve in such a way to avoid them? And are there certain areas of maths, for example, that our children don't need to be? I remember being forced into certain things and I lost my passion. And more importantly than anything else is, as it's number 2 there, does it provide our kids with a contextual sense of learning? In other words, when a child is learning, are they being given the context of what they're learning? So instead of compartmentalizing all the learning to different lessons, it's all integrated in such a way where actually there is progressive. And really, if you ask me the question, what type of education is there out there right now? There's kind of conventional schools, like I grew up, comprehensive schools. Then you've got your private schools, and then you've got the progressive schools. And that's it, 3 categories. And this is where we're at the moment, because for years we've kept out of the conventional education system. And I don't think that the system is providing our children with enough context and making it applied to what the world is today. I mean, that's just my view. Secondly, are we teaching our kids to be self-reliant, or are we teaching our kids just simply to conform to a system, and if they don't pass those exams, they get bad results? Bloody scary. If you're watching this as a parent, ask yourself these questions. And the challenge we've got, of course, is fear of missing out. So I meet so many parents that are obsessed with getting exam results. And when I say, well, why do you want your kids to get good exam results? Oh, so that if they get the right results, they can go and then get a good career or go to a good university. So if they go to a good university, what's that enable to do? Get a good career. And you believe in the job system right now. Oh, well, actually, we're looking at trying to get out of our profession, or we've gone self-employed. So you went all the way up the career ladder, and then you changed direction. And now you're self-employed doing something totally different, which is what happened to me. And yet you want your kids to go through the same thing. So somewhere along the line, we are measuring ourselves against an old system that is broken to start with. And again, let's not press that button, because I could talk for an hour on that alone. And then finally, I'm going to ask you to reflect on, genuinely, are your children happy? Look at your children and ask yourself the simple question. I've gone out of focus here. Ask yourself the simple question, are your children happy? Are they coming back and joyous about what they're learning? Do they understand the context of what they're learning to the bigger picture of the world in the future? Do they see how it ties to maybe having a sense of purpose and life and inspiration and being mindful and being reflective and meditative and having emotional development? Or do they feel like just pursuing the process to keep mum and dad happy, the teachers happy, and pass exams? And I think the minute we address that question, we address fundamentally a much more important and deeper question, which is, how can we educate our children to be more whole, to be grounded, emotionally developed, spiritually developed, have a greater sense of themselves, their sense of purpose, what makes them passionate, so they can pursue those things instead of doing what they're told to do to conform to a set of rules that enable them to get a job, which at some point they're probably going to freaking change anyway. That's it. Is it broken? Hell yeah, it's broken. All right, Dr. Rowe, signing out.